Yes, finally, the first Jack Nicholson film I have ever reviewed on this channel. Let's get started. Hello YouTube, Film Buff 06 here. Coming your way with my first review of a film featuring one of my favourite actors of all time, Jack Nicholson, on the channel. And it is the underrated comedy drama About Schmidt, which of course stars Jack Nicholson himself and Kathy Bates, who were both nominated for acting Oscars for their respective leading and supporting roles in this film, as well as Hope Davis, Dermot Mulroney, and June Squibb, who, if you don't know her, she was nominated for who was nominated at last year's Oscars for her supporting role in Nebraska. It was released in 2002. About Schmidt was also released in 2002, was loosely based on a 1996 novel of the same name by Louis Begley, and was directed by Alexander Payne, who also co-wrote the screenplay with usual collaborator Jim Taylor. Now, for those of you who don't know who Alexander Payne is, he directed such down-to-earth, realistic dramas as Citizen Ruth, Election, Sideways, The Descendants, and last year's Nebraska. Now, the story of About Schmidt centres on a 66-year-old man named Warren Schmidt, played by Jack Nicholson, who has just retired from a job as an actuary for an insurance company and is suffering from a late-life crisis where he believes he is about to face a thoroughly depressing and meaningless life. One evening, he sees a child reach advert for adopting poor, unfortunate African children and decides to sponsor a 6-year-old Tanzanian orphan named Ndugu by writing a series of letters to the child expressing how he is feeling inside. After Helen, his wife of 42 years, played by June Squibb, passes away, Warren goes on a road trip of self-discovery in the 35-foot RV he was initially planning to drive his late wife around the country in order to try and stop his only daughter, Jeannie, played by Hope Davis, from marrying a horribly mulleted, underachieving waterbed salesman named Randall, played by Dermot Mulroney, whom he doesn't really approve of, whilst encountering Randall's eccentric mother, Roberta, played by Kathy Bates, and connecting with a few stranger townsfolk along the way. So, what are my thoughts on... what are my thoughts on About Schmidt? While I won't say it is as good as Election, The Descendants, or even Sideways, I cannot deny that this film is brilliant, funny, thought-provoking, and emotionally touching without it being too depressing. This is just one of those movies that makes you want to do something with your life and would make you laugh and cry in equal measure every time you watch it. Rolf Kent's music perfectly nails every mood throughout the film. The cinematography is simply brilliant. The film is beautifully directed by Alexander Payne, who has yet to make a bad film, and proves why he is one of the most underrated filmmakers working today by giving this film an appropriately, small town, low budget feel. Speaking of Alexander Payne, his screenplay with Jim Taylor is just brilliantly well written, and the humour is excellently well handled, full of wit with a little tinge of the cynicism, black comedy, and social satire that you've come to expect from an Alexander Payne film. And it lends itself to creating such a series of memorable moments. I mean, there is the scene where Warren is for example, there is the scene where Warren is comforted by a stranger, a Kansas woman, after she psychoanalyzes him, and he tries to snog her on the lips, just causing her to recoil and just yell at him to get out of her RV, which is one of, if not the funniest scene in the film. There is also the scene where Warren and Jeannie argue over the cheap casket during dinner, which is quite funny as well. And there is also the scene where Warren makes his heartwarming speech at the wedding reception, which I thought was really moving and, you know, poignant. Yeah. The film is a bit slow, and a bit slow at times, and the pacing also drags a bit at times, especially at the start, but not quite necessarily to an extent where the movie becomes boring or tedious to watch. The acting, for the most part, is great. While I thought some of the supporting cast, including Hope Davis, June Squibb, and especially Dermot Mulroney, were a little bit bland in their roles, in my opinion anyway, I thought Kathy Bates did an excellent job in her small role as the eccentric, bizarre, oddball, you know, sex-obsessed mother, especially during the scene where during the iconic scene where she sits naked in the pool alongside Nicholson, which I thought was hilarious. Of course, after seeing this film, I could very clearly see why a lot of people would think that this is one of the best performances of Jack Nicholson's long and fantastic career. And I am pleased to be one of these people. He was terrific in his portrayal of an ordinary man who is desperately searching for some profound meaning in his life. At times you'd expect Nicholson to be his usual neurotic self, likewise with his previous roles, likewise with some of his previous, you know, memorable roles, such as Randall P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jack Torrance in The Shining, Colonel Nathan R. Jessup in A Few Good Men, Melvin Udall in As Good as It Gets, Frank Costello in The Departed, and heck, even the Joker, the frickin' Joker in Batman 1989. You'd expect him to be his usual neurotic self, you know, sort of snap and, you know, rant and rave, almost like a crazed lunatic about, you know, all the crazy shit that is happening, around him in this film. But what is surprisingly refreshing is that Nicholson plays his part more subtly than usual. On a side note, if it was up to me on who should have won the Best Actor Oscar back in 2003, instead of Adrian Brody for the pianist, who actually did win, I would have loved there to be. I would have honestly loved there to be a tie in that category between Daniel Day-Lewis for Gangs of New York and Jack Nicholson for this film. That's how great I thought his performance was. The ending to this film when, spoiler alert, Warren believes that he is facing a life of loneliness, death, and despair after seeing Jeannie finally marry Randall. But all of a sudden, he receives a letter from Ndugu that contains a beautiful drawing of him and Warren holding hands, which then causes Warren to instantly realise that he has finally managed to make a difference in his life, and he ends up tearing up after the fact. I mean, I thought that was an emotionally uplifting and satisfying way to end the movie, and it's also very, very rare that we actually get to see Jack Nicholson crying on screen. That was great. That was great. It almost made me tear up quite a few times. Made me tear up almost. If you are a fan of Jack Nicholson's fantastic work in general, I would highly recommend that you go and check this underrated movie out. However, I would advise you not to watch this movie if you're suffering, at least if you're suffering from depression. In conclusion, my overall rating for About Schmidt is an 8 out of 10. Now, feel free to leave a comment in the section below and not only let me know your thoughts on About Schmidt, but also let me know what your personal favourite Jack Nicholson film is. Plus, feel free to subscribe to my channel. And until my next video, which is going to be a review for the most recent TV adaptation of J.K. Rowling's The Casual Vacancy, do take care, everyone, and live long and prosper.